Now, for this analysis, it's important to first differentiate between small country and a large country. So when a small importing country imposes a tariff, it has no influence on the world prices. Yeah? Whereas a large country, if any policies that influences its level of imports is going to change or influence the world price. All right, and so that's the distinction between the two countries, and that helps us look at the welfare changes. So let's start with a small country. What happens when a small importing country imposes a tariff? All right, so we have, and we can assume any good. Okay, we have our demand and supply for this good, and since this is an importing country, the world price is below the equilibrium price in this in the domestic market. Okay, now this country, which is importing how much? This much amount of the good. So this is the level of imports. This is excess demand at world price. Yeah, when it imposes a tariff, let's assume that the world price here is 5, and it imposes a tariff T equal to the amount of so let's assume that the world price is 5 and this country imposes a tariff, a unit tariff of $3 on each unit that it imports. Okay, so what happens in the domestic market as a result of this? Well, the consumers initially were purchasing this good at $5, either from the foreign market, either from the foreign market, or at $5 from the domestic market. So we can see here that the world price was the price that was operating even in the domestic market. So at this world price, this is how much the producers were producing, and this is what the consumption was. So this was the level of imports. But both, whether you bought it from the foreign market or from the domestic producers, the amount that was being paid was $5. Now the government comes in and says, well, if you purchase this good from the foreign market, that means if you are importing this good, you also have to pay $3 of tariff. So the total amount that people now pay if they purchase this or if they import this is 5 plus 3, $8. But if they purchase this from the domestic producers, they are still paying $5. So what happens? Well, consumers are now going to start buying more from the domestic market, and they will keep purchasing from the domestic market, which then means that the demand for the domestic product, or the product that is produced domestically, is going to rise, and the price at home is going to increase as well. By how much? Well, the domestic consumers will keep purchasing from domestic market and not from the foreign market. The price at home will keep rising, and they will then start importing only if the domestic price also reaches 8. All right. So the domestic prices keeps rising. It was 5, but the demand for domestic product increased. So the price at home will start increasing, and it would increase how much? By the amount of the tariff. Okay. So now if you look, if you try to show this in your graph, what this means is that the domestic price, which is PW at this time, is going to increase by the amount of the tariff, which is $3. Keep in mind that this is an analysis for unit tariff. That means specific tariff. That means it's $3 per unit of the imported good, right? And so at home, the price is going to increase by the amount of the tariff, and the new price now is PW plus tariff. This is what happens in the domestic market, okay? And in terms of dollar value, what is this? This is 5 plus 3, which is equal to 8. All right, so we have $8 here, and the difference between the two is the amount of the tariff equal to 3. Okay, we want to look at the welfare analysis for this country. Okay, now what we are going to do is we are going to look at changes in surplus in this country. Yeah, in order to do that, we need to know before and after tariff. Okay, so what was the price that this country was, the consumers, or what was the domestic price before the tariff? Yeah. It was PW. After the tariff, well, the domestic price was PW plus T. Okay, and so this is a change in price as a result of tariff, which will make our analysis much easier. And I'm going to just delete all this for the time being. Welfare change, which is change in consumer surplus, change in producer surplus, and because now you have a tariff revenue as well. So change in consumer surplus is, well, what was the price that this country was facing, the domestic prices, before the tariff? Well, it was this. Yeah, so consumer surplus was the area above the demand function and below this price. So this was the consumer surplus, right? After the tariff, the price that this country was, the domestic prices, is PW plus T. Yeah, and so what is the change in consumer surplus? Well, before the tariff, this was the domestic price, yeah, and the consumer surplus was the area below the demand function and above this price. So this was your consumer surplus, yeah. After the tariff, the prices increased to PW plus T. So this was your consumer surplus. So if you're looking at the change in consumer surplus, it's the area below the demand function between these two prices. This is the change in consumer surplus. All right, and so it makes sense to just look at the change instead of having to calculate both of them, before and after the complete consumer surplus. So let me just put those down. But first of all, with the new tariff, this is your level of imports. So imports have gone down, and let me just categorize this. This is A, B, C, and D. Okay. Now, what is the change in consumer surplus? Well, the area between these two prices and below the demand function. So this is your change in consumer surplus. Is that positive or negative? Well, it is a negative. Prices have increased, so consumers are worse off. A plus B plus C plus D. Yeah. What about change in producer surplus? Well, the same thing we'll do for the producer surplus. Is the area above the supply function between the two prices. So this is your change in producer surplus, and that is a positive because they are getting a higher price for their good. What about tariff revenue? Well, tariff revenue is tariff times the level of imports after the tariff. So what is your tariff revenue? Well, this is the amount of the tariff. Yeah, we know that from here. This is the amount of the tariff. What is the new level of imports? Well, up here, a product of this is going to be the area of this rectangle here. So what is the change in tariff revenue, well, that is equal to C. So what is the total change in welfare or in surplus? Well, that is, how about we look at this? We have to add all these changes. A cancels out with A and C cancels out with C. So what are we left with? We are left with minus P plus D. Yeah. So this is the total change in welfare. Okay. Now it's important to keep that in mind and keep in mind that this is the change that we're looking at. So total change in welfare is P plus D. Now, how do you explain this? Well, we had B and D. Have a look at what B and D represent here. This is B. Yeah? Look at the x-axis. What does it represent? Well, this is how much the domestic country was producing before the tariff. Yeah, imports were much higher. After the tariff, producers are producing this extra amount. Yeah, a good that this country did not have a comparative advantage in, right? Because what is the price that they had without trade? This, what is the world price up here? Yeah. So they don't have a comparative advantage in this good, but by imposing a tariff, they distorted the producer's choice, and there is an increase in production. Yeah, that's what this B is representing. What about D? Well, D is before tariff, this was a level of consumption, domestic consumers. Afterwards, this is the level of consumption. So D is the decrease in consumption as a result of the tariff. So consumers' choices have been distorted. So B and D in this case represent, B and D represent the production and consumption distortion. Okay, and this is also referred to as, you guys probably know this already, this is referred to as deadweight loss. Why is it called deadweight loss? Well, because this is completely lost to this importing country, and I want to explain that. Look at the change in consumer surplus. It decreased by the amount A plus B plus C plus D. Yeah, this area A, it used to belong to consumers. After the tariff, it went to the producers. Yeah? So there was a transfer of welfare from consumers to producers. A. C was a part of the consumer surplus, but it was captured by the government as tariff revenue. Yeah? So A and C were transferred to producers and to the government. What about B? Well, B did not accrue to anyone. It was completely lost. Poof, gone. Yeah? So that's why it is referred to as deadweight loss. And so for this small country, what can we say? Well, tariff is welfare reducing because of this deadweight loss. Yeah. So this is the analysis for what happens when a small country imposes a tariff. Okay. Now, one mistake that students generally end up making is they add this value, which is deadweight loss, to their calculations of welfare change. Nope. Change in welfare is only this amount. B plus D is the end result of this change in surplus. So after you've calculated what the change is in welfare, yeah, the net effect is B plus D. It is not a part of the calculations for change in welfare. Yeah? That is only change in consumer surplus, producer surplus, and change in revenue. Okay, B plus D is a net effect of welfare change, which we define, yeah, as deadweight loss. Okay. All right, guys. So that is a change in welfare for a small country. What about for the large country? Now, in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens in comparison to, in comparison to the small country. Okay. So let me just take this. I'm going to draw this on this graph. All right. So large country, the way we've defined large country is that this country, okay, this country, the large country which is importing the good, as a result of the tariff, what happens is that there is a decrease in the demand for imports. Yeah, people are demanding less from this country. Yeah? A decrease in the demand for imports. Okay? Now, in the world market, this is a significant amount because it's a large country. So when there's a decrease in demand for this good in the world market, what happens to the prices? Well, the world price would fall. Yeah? So if you look here, compared to the small country, what's going to happen is that the world price after tariff is going to fall. Let's say it's 4. Yeah, just to make things easier, it falls to 4. What happens in the importing country? Well, now the same analysis as a small country, when you impose a tariff, they are going to demand more of domestic product, and till the price of the domestic product is world price plus tariff. It is world price plus tariff. So it's 4 plus tariff, which is equal to, tariff in this case is 3. That's what we are assuming, 7. So when you do the calculations for, when you're doing the calculations for the domestic price, it is the new world price. It is a new world price plus tariff. Yeah, and the new world price, let's donate that by a star, is a new world price plus tariff. Yeah. So the rise in the domestic market prices is not as much in the large country as it was in case of the small country. In the case of large country, the domestic price would only rise up to $7 compared to the small country. And the reason behind that is because there was a decrease in the world price, since it's a large country imposing a tariff. All right. Does that make sense? All right. So let's do the analysis properly for this large country. Now, in this case, we are going to assume that this importing country is a large country. What that means is that it can influence the world prices. Yeah. So when it imposes a tariff, there is a decrease in, when it imposes a tariff, there is a decrease in the demand for this good in the world market. Demand for imports decrease, and imports, I'm just going to use the term M. Okay. Demand for imports decrease. So what happens in the world market is that the price for this good is going to fall. Okay, so that is the relation here. So now this large country imposes a tariff. Let's say it imposes a tariff of $T, which is equal to, just like the case before, $3. Yeah, and the world price to begin with was, let's assume it was $5. Yeah. Now the world price falls as a result of the tariff. So the new world price, I'm going to assume that the new world price in this case is, let's say, $4. Yeah. And let's donate this with a star to differentiate between the original world price and the new world price. Now what happens? Well, world price has fallen, and now when the domestic producers are looking at purchasing from home or the foreign country, they have to pay a $3 tariff. Yeah. So what happens to the domestic price? Well, it is going to rise by the amount of the tariff, because whenever consumers in this country purchase this good from the foreign country, they have to pay a tariff of $3. So the domestic market is going to rise by the amount of $3, but this time it is going to rise from the new world price, because that's the world price now. Yeah. And so if this was your level of tariff, there is an increase. The world prices have, the domestic price has increased, and how much? Well, by the new world price plus tariff. Yeah. If you had to give a dollar amount, the tariff amount of the tariff was $3. Yeah. So it has increased by the amount by it is now $7. Okay. Now let me just show you guys what the new level of what can you tell us about the level of imports now? Well, it is world price, the new world price plus tariff. This is the amount that is now being imported by this large country. Okay. And comparing this to the previous one, well, in the before the tariff, this was the world price, and this is how much they were importing. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So there is a decrease in the level of imports in this case. And so now what we want to do is we want to look at what happens to the welfare, change in consumer surplus and producer surplus. So let's look at the welfare analysis in this case. Okay, and we are going to do this by looking at the change in consumer surplus, change in producer surplus, and since there is a tariff, there is going to be a tariff revenue that is going to be earned by the government. Yeah. Okay. So to look at change in consumer surplus, we are going to look at what was the price before the tariff was imposed. Yeah. And after. So before it was PW. This is the world price, and this is what the price was at home, because this country was trading freely in the world market. Yeah. After the tariff was imposed, what is the price in this country, the domestic price? Well, it is PW star, the new world price, plus the tariff that they have imposed. These are the two prices that we have to look at. Yeah. Now again, doing the same thing as before, change in consumer surplus prior to the tariff. It was the area below the demand function and above the price. This was a consumer surplus. Yeah? After the tariff was imposed, it is the new price that consumers are paying below the demand function, this area. Yeah. So what is the change in consumer surplus? Well, it's the difference between the two prices here and the area below the demand function. Yeah. That is what the domestic consumers are facing. All right. So let's now label these A, B, C, D, and I'm going to call this, let's call this F. Okay. And you'll see why we need that area as well. So what is the change in consumer surplus? Well, it's negative because the prices have increased, so consumers are going to be worse off. It's the area A plus B plus C plus D. That's right. What about the change in producer surplus? Well, it is going to be A, and if you look here, it is the two price changes. Yeah. And the area above the supply function. So this is the change in producer surplus, right? So tariff revenue in this case is, sorry, producer surplus in this case is A. What about tariff revenue? It is tariff into the new level of imports, how much you're importing now. Okay, and that area is, if you could look here, this is the new level of imports. Yeah, this is the new level of imports. Yeah, you can measure it at any place. This is the new level of imports. What about tariff? Well, this is where we make mistakes sometimes. If you're in a rush, we tend to think that this is the tariff. So this is the tariff revenue, because this is what it was in case of small country. But the tariff is being measured from the new world price, not the old world price, the new world price. Yeah. So the amount of tariff is this. This is the amount of tariff. It's PW star plus T. Yeah. This is the amount of tariff. And how much are you importing? This country importing? Well, it's this much. So this multiplied by this gives us the area of this rectangle here. Yeah. Cool, huh? So what is the tariff revenue in this case? Well, it is plus, because the government is earning this, C plus F. It is this F that brings about a difference between the welfare change for small and the large country. Okay, so this is your change in welfare. So what is the net welfare change in this case? Well, the net welfare change is you're going to add and subtract these. Yeah. And again, we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We are going to say, well, from consumer surplus lost A, B, C, D, that much area. Yeah, surplus measured by that area. A was transferred to the producers, so that cancels out, minus A plus A. C was captured by the government as tariff revenue. C cancels out. What are we left with? Well, we are left with a negative B plus D and a positive F, which is coming from tariff revenue, right? Now, B plus D, if you look at this here, B plus D is how much the country was producing before and how much it's producing afterwards. Yeah. So that is a distortion loss. Okay. Now, if you remember from before the tariff was imposed, this is how much the country was producing. Yeah. And after tariffs were imposed, there was an increase in production at home by this much amount. They are now producing a good that they don't have a comparative advantage in. Yeah, this importing country's cost of producing this good is much higher than the foreign country, which is the world price PW. So you just distorted the choices for the producers such that they moved their resources from maybe another production where they had a comparative advantage to production of this good that they don't have comparative advantage in. So B is your production distortion loss. Yeah. What about consumption distortion loss? That is an increase in the a decrease in the consumption of the good because you now have a tariff imposed. So this is your consumption distortion loss. Sorry. Okay. And both of them together are referred to as dead weight loss, because this doesn't accrue to anyone, this doesn't go to anyone, it just poofs disappear. Okay. Now, what about F? Where is this F coming from? Well, let's have a look. Why does this large country have this extra gain F? Where does this come from? Look at the graph. Well, F is the level of imports. Yeah, the new level of imports. And on the y-axis, the price, what is it? It's the difference in the world prices. It's the dip in the world price as a result of the tariff. Difference between the original world price and the new world price. Yeah. Now that is your terms of trade gain. Do you guys remember what is terms of trade? Well, terms of trade, this is price of an exported good over price of an imported good. Yeah. Think about price of export. X is you are selling the good, what your earnings are. Yeah, earnings are. Imported good, this is where you're spending money. This is your spending, your earnings. Yeah. So if your earnings increase, you're going to be better off. So terms of trade are improving. If the price of the good that you're purchasing, what you're spending money on, increases, you're going to be worse off because you're spending more. Yeah. So this is your terms of trade. In this case, for this importing country, the price of imports just fell. Yeah. So what happened to this ratio? Well, it increased because your denominator fell. Yeah. So there are terms of trade gain. That's what this F is the amount by which the world prices fell into the level of imports. What that means is that before the tariff, you were paying $5 for each unit that you were importing. Yeah. After the tariff, the world prices fell. Now you're only paying $4 for each unit that you're importing. Yeah. So your expenditure just fell. Yeah. That's what this is representing. This level of imports prior to the tariff, you're paying $5. Now you're only paying $4. So your expenditure on imports has fallen. Yeah. For this level of imports, you were initially paying $5. Now you're only paying $4. So this is the extra gain you've made. Why? Because now you're spending less money on imported good. And this is referred to as your, F is referred to as your terms of trade gains. All right, guys. Yeah. Now, let me highlight this point. This is your total change in welfare. It consists of production distortion law, it consists of deadweight loss and terms of trade gain. Yeah. So what can we say as far as this country is concerned? Are they better off with the tariff or not? Well, it depends. Is tariff beneficial for, this is the kind of question that you might be asked, is tariff welfare improving for a large country? For a large country, well, we don't know, because whether the change in welfare minus B plus D plus F is positive or negative compared to 0 depends upon whether B plus D is bigger or smaller than F. Yeah, whenever the positive terms of trade gains are larger than the deadweight loss of a tariff, the country is better off. So what can we say about gains from imposing a tariff for a large country? Well, it would depend upon, and if we were to draw a graph, generally there is a graph for an optimum tariff for a large country. If you were to measure at different levels of tariff, what is on the y-axis, you measured minus B plus D, which is terms of trade loss, plus E, which was, minus B plus D, which was deadweight loss, plus E, which was terms of trade gain. And you asked yourself, and you did this analysis, for a small level of tariff, generally speaking, E is bigger than B plus D. As you keep raising your tariffs, it keeps raising up to a point beyond which it starts becoming welfare reducing. And this point at which you maximize the welfare is generally referred to as the optimum tariff. Yeah. So another question that's generally asked is, for a large country, what is the optimum tariff? And the answer is, the optimum tariff for a large country is positive. That means there is a certain level of tariff for which imposing the tariff is going to be welfare improving for a large country. All right, guys, so this is your analysis for the large country. The difference from the small country is primarily that the world prices have